Hi everybody, I'm Dennis. Welcome back to the Bindery and another installment in the Bookbinding Basics series. In past videos, I've talked about the basic tools and materials to get you started, shown you a couple of binding structures, and introduced some handy bench accessories to make your bookbinding easier and more versatile. If any of that sounds unfamiliar or you'd like to review, you can find everything in my Bookbinding Basics playlist. Today, I want to show you a third binding structure, and in doing so, introduce you to another material that for bookbinding is almost as important as paper and thread. I am, of course, talking about glue. Glue is a topic that always gets a lot of questions, but for today I'm just going to keep it simple. This is the basics after all, so I'm not going to do a deep dive into every type of adhesive that's available. If you're just starting out, there's one glue that'll do just about everything you need. That glue is called polyvinyl acetate, also known as PVA, or more generically, plain old white glue. First invented in the early 20th century, PVA is now one of the most common adhesives around. It's water-based, so cleanup of undried glue is a simple matter of soap and water. If you're just starting out, pretty much any white glue sold for school or craft use will get the job done. But if you want your work to last, look for a glue that is sold as acid-free, archival, or pH neutral. Those glues will have a better chance at not reacting adversely with the paper over time. And avoid any of the yellow glues made for wood, as their formulations will almost certainly be damaging to the paper in the long run. No matter which glue you have, do yourself a favor and test it out on some scrap pieces of paper first. Stick a few things together to get an idea of how fast it grabs, how long it takes to dry, and how durable it is. Knowing your materials is a big key to success. In most cases, you'll want to portion out some of your glue into a more convenient container. I like to use a plastic one with a wide, well-fitted lid. One, because it gives me ready access to as much glue as I need, whether it be a lot or a little, and two, because cleaning it up is a breeze. Just let the excess glue dry and then peel it off. For applying glue, I recommend you get some cheap brushes in a variety of sizes. I say cheap because sooner or later they'll get crusted up with dried glue and tossed in the trash. Because of this, I'm not particular about my glue brushes, though I have found that a medium-sized round brush is handy for general work, while a 2-inch chip brush is a cheap and effective choice for large areas. Smaller brushes don't hold as much glue, so they're best kept for tiny jobs or getting into tight places. To prolong the life of my brushes, I keep a jar of water in the bindery at all times. I drop my brushes in there immediately after use, and then I give them a good washing with soap and water whenever I remember. I'll share a few more gluing tips as we go, but for now, let's move on to today's book structure. This is called the Sewn Boards Binding, which was invented by Gary Frost in the 1980s. It's become a very popular structure among hand bookbinders, and for good reason. It's a hardcover book, but it's actually relatively quick to make. Its main features are that the boards are flush with the pages, and when opened, the spine covering breaks away from the text block, allowing for plenty of flexibility. This makes the sewn board structure perfect for blank books like journals and sketchbooks. And what's better, it uses relatively little glue, which is why I thought it would be the perfect next step for the series. It may look complicated, but it simply builds on skills that I've already shown. If you've been following along with the Basics series, you should have no problem at all. Let's take a look at what we'll need to make one. Obviously, you'll need some paper for your pages. I've already prepared some folded signatures, each with 6 sheets. I'd recommend somewhere between 4 and 8 sheets, depending on the weight of your paper. Frost said that this structure was best suited for books between 2 and 8 signatures, so keep that in mind for yours. Also, thinner books are easier to trim by hand, so if you don't have a guillotine, it's best to start small. As for the height and width, that'll depend on your materials and preferences, so I won't get into specific measurements. Whatever you use, though, make sure your paper's grain is parallel with the spine of the book. For end papers, you'll need 2 pieces of a decorative paper of your choice, which should be cut to the same size as your main sheets. You can choose something that's as plain or fancy as you like. I've gone for a plain, solid color here. The first part of the cover construction is some cardstock. Mine is 160 GSM. I'd recommend a neutral or accent color, as most of it won't be seen in the finished binding. You'll need 2 pieces the same size as your pages, plus a third that'll be used for some infills later. The other component of the covers is some gray board. You'll need 2 pieces cut to the same size as one of your folded signatures. Mine is about 1.2 millimeters thick, though yours could be thinner or thicker if you're making a particularly large book. For the spine covering, you'll need a material that's durable, flexible, and will take glue well. I'm using a commercial book cloth. Other options could be paper, parchment, or thin leather. Finally, you'll need a covering material, which will be the main thing that sets the look of your book, so have fun with this. I'm going to be using my own marbled paper, of course. Whatever you go with should be thin enough to fold around the edges of the boards, so paper or book cloth are both good choices. To line the spine, you'll need a piece of strong, thin, flexible material. I'm using Japanese mulberry paper, but a strong paper or a thin natural cloth would work as well. To sew the book, you'll need some thread. I'm using linen, though just about any light, strong thread should do the trick. I like to give my thread a coating of beeswax, but that's optional. The final material is obviously the glue that we discussed earlier. For tools, I'll only be using what I've discussed so far in the basics series: a bone folder, ruler, square, utility knife, pencil, awl, needle, scissors, and the recently introduced glue brush. For bench accessories, I've got my cutting mat, piercing cradle, and 2 bricks. Some waste paper will be helpful to have at hand, as well as some release paper or moisture barrier, and potentially a bit of fine sandpaper. That's all you'll need for the basic binding, but I've got some extra materials here so I can do a couple of different versions to show you some variations as well. Alright, let's make a book. The first thing to do is to fold up your signatures, end papers, and cover stock. Folding all the pages of each signature together ensures that they will nest together well. The same principle applies to the cover stock, which should be folded around your board material to ensure a good fit. The end papers should be folded sharply, as they'll get glued in separately. If your end papers have a distinct up orientation, place them together and mark one as the front and the other as the back. Those markings should be placed face down when gluing them out. Offset the spine edges by about 5 mm, then place another piece of waste paper 5 mm back from there. While holding everything down with your offhand, start applying the glue. It's a good habit to always brush away from the center of the paper towards the edges and lift the brush after every stroke. Don't drag it backwards. That way you'll avoid driving glue up underneath the paper where you don't want it. A stabbing motion can also be effective, especially if your material has a heavy texture. Pull back the guard sheet and get it far away from you. That goes for the bottom waste sheet as well. Leaving those on the bench is just asking for trouble. Exposed glue will inevitably wind up where you don't want it, so get in the habit of treating it like toxic waste. Carefully line up your glued end paper with the spine of one of your signatures. Press it in place with your fingers, then firm it down with your bone folder. Do the same for the second end paper. If you'd rather glue these out one at a time, that's okay too. Just go at your own pace. Nobody's timing you. Once those are attached, place them under a brick for a few minutes to dry. Most PVA glues will be ready to work with in that time, but of course, your results may vary depending on your materials. While those are drying, we can make up a piercing template. Cut a piece of scrap paper to the length of your signatures. Make a mark 10 mm in from either end for the kettle stitches, or a bit more if you plan on trimming your book. Between those, mark sewing hole locations in pairs about a finger's width wide. Just how many will depend on the size of your book. For small books, 2 pairs are sufficient, though larger books could need 3 or more. Generally, 1 pair of holes every 2 or 3 inches should be more than enough. Finally, mark an H at one end to denote the head of the book. With that done, you can arrange all the components for sewing. Place your new end papers at the front and back of your text block. Then add the folded cardstock as well. Using your piercing cradle, awl, and template, begin piercing your sewing holes, first in the cardstock cover, then each of the signatures in turn. With those pierced, it's time to get sewing. I've covered needle and thread prep elsewhere, so if you need a refresher, check out my tips and tutorials playlist. To begin, we'll start with the cardstock cover. For this binding, the covers are sewn right into the book, hence the name. As usual, I begin at the kettle stitch, passing the needle through each hole as I get to it. This should leave a short length of thread exposed at the spine at each of the paired holes. When I reach the other kettle stitch, I can then add in the first signature, which should be one with an end paper attached. The needle goes in through the next kettle stitch hole and out again to the spine at the next sewing station. At this point, you could certainly continue sewing all along, but I like to add a French link stitch for a bit of extra support. This is easily done by passing the needle under the exposed thread of the previous signature before continuing. It's a strong and attractive stitch that's often used for exposed sewing. If you need a little bit more clearance to maneuver the needle, try moving your text block to the edge of your work surface, or place it on top of your bricks if that's more convenient. When you reach the opposite kettle stitch, make sure that there are no loose spots in your sewing, and then secure the two signatures together with a knot. For the following link stitches, take care to pass the working thread under the previous one, just where it exits the sewing hole. Doing so will result in a nice balanced look to the sewing. At the end of the third section, secure the sewing with a kettle stitch by passing the needle below the previous signature towards the outside of the book. Take up the slack, then pass the needle up through the loop that's formed. Pull on the thread only enough to close the stitch. Too much tension can distort the text block and impede the book opening. A firm tug is all you need. Continue this pattern of link stitches and kettle stitches for all of your signatures until you reach the other piece of cardstock. Finish off with a double kettle stitch and trim the excess thread. With the sewing done, I like to now insert the cover boards. These rest within the fold of the cardstock covers and are secured in place just with a strip of glue along the gutter. Apply a line of glue on both sides of the gray board. You want to aim for a thin, even coat. Too much glue will result in squeeze out, which can make a mess. Snug the board into the fold and work it down well with your folder. An extra step here, which I can show you here on this other book, is to make a recess in the board to go around the sewing. Mark the position of your kettle stitches on the board, then trim away just a millimeter of material between the marks. This is especially helpful if your thread is on the thicker side. This will give clearance for the board to fit around the sewing thread and fit snugly at the head and tail. As before, give those a few minutes to dry under some weight. We can now move on to gluing out the spine. Knock your book up square to the head and back, and when you're satisfied that it's square and flat, position it between your two bricks with about 5 millimeters of the spine exposed. Or, if it's a larger book, on the edge of the bench with both bricks on top. Measure the thickness of your book and cut a piece of your spine lining material to fit. I got a little bit carried away here and glued that out before I was ready. I should have waited until I'd applied a good layer of glue onto the spine. When you do yours, you want to be sure to work the glue down well into all the gaps, working from the middle of the book towards the edges. Brush some glue onto your spine lining material, then carefully put that in place. This can be worked down with your fingers, bone folder, or a stiff bristled brush. Once applied, leave the book to dry thoroughly for about an hour. The book's now effectively bound, but before we move on to covering it, we should discuss trimming. In his original description, Frost says that a guillotine is the best tool for this, but since that's beyond most beginners' means, I'll give you a few tips on trimming your book by hand. Keep in mind that thinner books are easier to trim by hand than thicker ones, so factor that into your design. And if you'd rather skip this step, that's just fine too. In that case, I'd recommend making your covers a bit wider to create a square at the foredge. To do that, make your cardstock covers 10 millimeters wider than the sheets of your pages, and the grayboard pieces 5 millimeters wider than the text block. That extra space will help to protect the irregular edges of your pages. The results won't be as crisp as trimmed edges, but if you work neatly and carefully, you should be able to achieve a tidy appearance that's perfectly acceptable. Okay, back to trimming. The easiest place to start is at the foredge. Measure from the spine of the book to a point at least 5 millimeters back from the narrowest part of the book, and make a mark near the head and tail. This may seem like a lot to cut off, but being frugal here won't help. The offcut side of the paper will actually help to guide and support the blade and keep it running true. Trying to remove just a hair's breadth will almost certainly result in the blade wandering out of the cut and making a mess. Keep in mind that this is far from an exact science, and like any skill, takes practice. In fact, I'd recommend you do a few test runs on something like a catalog, coloring book, or a pad of paper. Okay, time to give it a go. As a little added insurance, I like to use a piece of masking tape to fix my ruler to the book. This will keep the ruler from slipping, and if your hands get tired partway through the process, you can take a break without fear of everything getting out of position. Make sure you have a fresh sharp edge on your knife before you begin. I found that pulling the blade towards myself like slicing bread creates a twisting motion that transfers right into my cut. To correct for this, I position the edge parallel with my shoulders, and by working standing up, I can look straight down at the blade. The most important thing is that you hold your blade vertically, and to maintain that same hand position throughout the process. This position allows me to draw the blade straight across while keeping an eye on the angle of the blade. Press down on the ruler to compress the pages, and then begin with nice light cuts. Taking light cuts keeps your hands from getting tired and lets you focus instead on maintaining that hand position. I'm showing you this in real time, by the way, so you can get a sense of the actual pace. It'll take quite a few passes to get through the gray board, but once you do, just go 1 or 2 sheets of paper at a time. It's not the sort of thing you want to rush. If your book is thick, you'll need to extend your blade, so please be careful. Be careful when you reposition at the start of the cut, as the blade can dig into the exposed corner of the text block. With care and a little bit of luck, you'll be through it before you know it. If your edge is way off, you may be able to try again, but you can only do that so many times before you run out of book. Like I said, it pays to practice first. Minor rough spots on the edge can be smoothed out with a bit of sandpaper. Place the book between your bricks with just a few millimeters protruding and press down firmly with your offhand. Either using a sanding block or just your fingers, lightly sand in line with the pages. With the foredge done, you can move on to the tail. This time use your square to mark a line 90 degrees to the spine, then proceed with cutting as before. If the head of the book looks good, you may be able to get away without trimming that, but chances are you'll want it to match the other 2 edges, so go ahead and finish that off as well. An optional refinement before we get to the spine covering is to conceal the top corners of the boards, which will be visible in the finished book otherwise. For this, you'll need to cut some small pieces of your spine covering material. These then get glued neatly over the top corners of the boards. This is a subtle but really refined touch. But as I said, that's optional, so let's carry on with the basic version. Next, we'll make the spine covering. Measure the thickness of your book, then cut a piece of cardstock to that width. This will become the spine stiffener and should be long grain. Trim that to the height of your book plus 1 millimeter. A second piece of cardstock can be used as a temporary spacer. This piece should be a bit longer than the height of your book and at least 10 millimeters wide, or half the thickness of your book, whichever is more. Next, you'll need to cut a piece of the spine covering material. The exact width of that will depend on the thickness of your individual book. A general rule would be about 2 times the thickness of your book to allow for the breakaway portions, plus at least 25 millimeters to glue it on. The length should be the height of your book, plus about 30 millimeters. I like to mark a center line on both the inside of the spine covering and the spine stiffener. This will help to align the two pieces when we glue them together. Glue out the spine stiffener and apply it to the covering material, using the center lines to get it in place. Leave equal material on either end for the turn-ins. Work that down with your folder and then apply glue to one turn-in. Fold the material inward and smooth it out, pressing it in place until it holds. Then repeat that at the other end. Check that the edges of the spine covering are parallel with the spine stiffener, and if they're off a bit, give those a quick trim. Then use your folder to crease and fold the spine cover along the edges of the stiffener. It should have a U shape like this when you're done. Lastly, you'll want to add some reference marks to help align the cover material. Flip the spine piece over and using the spare strip aligned with the folds you just made, make some reference marks. On cloth you can make a crease with the tip of your folder, or on other materials a light pencil line will suffice. In either case, those marks will be concealed by the cover material later. Put the spine cover onto the book to check the fit. It should be perfectly snug and should extend just a little bit beyond the head and tail. If it all looks good, we can now attach it to the book. Using the same spare strip from a moment ago as a guard, apply glue to both edges of the spine cover. Neatness here counts, as these unglued areas are what will allow the spine cover to break away when the book is opened. Then, taking care to center it perfectly, apply it to the book. Try to keep it nice and tight to the spine, and watch out for squeeze out. If you get some, wipe it away quickly. Once you're happy with the placement, set it aside under a brick to dry. This next step is optional, but I think it helps to give the book a more seamless appearance. Cut 2 pieces of cardstock to the height of the text block and as wide as the space from the foredge to the spine cover material, with a couple of millimeters extra in either direction. The color of this piece will be hidden, so I'm using a lighter one for clarity. Apply a thin strip of glue along the edge beside the spine cover and press it into place. This brings the surface of the board up flush with the spine covering, which will help hide that transition under the cover material. You can now finish those off by carefully trimming away the excess, doing the same on the other side. And speaking of covering material, that's the second last step. Apply a strip of glue along the edge of your cover material and press it down firmly, just covering the reference marks that we made earlier, and making sure that the turn-ins at the head and tail are equal. Flip the book over, and if necessary, trim the turn-ins to be the same width. Cut the corners at 45 degrees, leaving a gap at the corner that's 1.5 times the total thickness of all the cover layers. You can do that by eye, but I find the angled lines on my cutting mat to be helpful guides when doing this. Open the book to the inner cardstock cover. Working on a waste sheet, apply glue to the head and tail turn-ins. Then, working on the edge of your work surface, start with your thumb or the heel of your hand to ease the turn-in up and into the book. Pinch it into place, then follow it up with a bone folder. Do the same at the other end. And again, this is uncut footage here, so you can get a true sense of the process. Fold in the tiny bit of cover material at both corners. Next, you can glue the foredge flap and then turn that in as well. When covering in paper, I like to tap down the sharp edges at the corners at this point and mold them a little bit to give them a slightly rounded shape. Now we just need to go ahead and attach the other cover paper. You can then place the book under some weight, or if you're feeling confident, you can move on right away to putting down the end papers. Open the book to the end paper, and into the middle insert first a release paper and then a waste sheet. Putting the release paper in now will prevent fumbling for it once the glue has been applied. Next, apply a neat line of glue around the 3 outer edges of the outer half of the end paper, which is called the paste down, for obvious reasons. Carefully lift the paste down and remove the waste sheet, leaving the release paper in place. Now, close the cover and press down firmly. After a moment, you can open it back up to quickly wipe away any squeeze out and give the edges a quick press with the bone folder. Now, I found it to be nearly impossible to prevent at least some amount of rippling on the paste downs when doing it this way. I attribute this to the damp edges of the paste down swelling while the dry center stays the same size, which obviously causes ripples. To fix that, I decided to try using double-sided tape on one of the other bindings that I've been working on instead of glue. The tape can be tricky to handle, but I think it does a good job in achieving a smooth appearance. Whether it has the same holding power as the glue remains to be seen. If you go for the double-sided tape method, then congratulations, your book is all done. For the glued version we've been working on, I just need to finish putting down the other end paper. Then, it just needs a bit of time to rest under these bricks, and it'll be finished as well. That final hour of drying time is always the longest, but it's finally over, so let's see how our book turned out. One of the less obvious benefits of this binding is that the minimal glue means that there shouldn't be any noticeable warping of the covers. They're looking nice and flat, no press required. The real proof is seeing how it opens, though. Right away you can see the breakaway spine in action. The binding is nice and flexible, giving plenty of access to the full surface area of the pages. Here at the head and tail you can see the exposed gray board, but personally I like this little peek at the construction. But of course this binding's adaptability is one of its best features, and you can see that in these other versions that I made. This is an untrimmed version, in which I covered the exposed corners of the boards, and it's got a 4-edged square to allow for the uneven pages, and I rather like the look of that one. I also made a much chunkier version. This one has 13 signatures, which I trimmed in the guillotine, but as you can see, it still functions really well. And of course, I've got my original pocket-sized version here too. I had a lot of fun making these, and I hope you did too. If you've got questions about the process, then please put them down in the comments, and I'll try to answer them as best I can, both for you and everyone else. If necessary, I'll add an FAQ section to the video description for everyone to reference. Anyway, that's all for this time. Thank you so much for watching. As always, I'm Dennis. I'll be back again in the next video, so until then, happy binding.